After cashing the checks, money orders, and such, I returned to the office to get down to business. I've made quite a profit selling gas masks and protective gear, and business is good. After putting part of the money in the safe and in the cash box, I look over the stacks of orders. And there are 2 orders in what I call the exempt pile. One order included an explanatory message saying that the customer thought it might be prudent to get a mask because there had been a couple of disasters near where she lived. I can sympathize. The other's from a guy saying he didn't care about any special features. He just wanted a cool mask to wear to an upcoming party. That's fine by me. It even strikes me as a little amusing for some reason. I take care of those orders first, carefully packaging the masks and making sure to set them apart from the others. After that's done, I tally the number of orders in the other stack, what I call the special orders pile. And once I'm sure of how many masks I'll need to prepare, I fetch the required number and bring them into the back room to begin the process. Safety is the primary thing. First, I inspect my gloves and apron, and finding no flaws, I put them on. Then I don my best gas mask and make sure it's working as it should. With everything in order, I take one of the masks from its container, grab one of the jars from off the shelf, and get to work. I pride myself on the thoroughness with which I work. And by the time I'm done working on a mask, it's like the poison is bonded to the rubber, plastic, filters, etc. at the molecular level. Most customers wear the masks at least once. After all, the first thing most people do when they get a mask is to try it on to make sure it fits properly. When they do, they inhale the poison with every breath, and every inch of skin in contact with the rest of the mask absorbs poison through the sweat glands. Even if the customer doesn't wear the mask, he or she just keeps it in storage in the house, the poison can still take effect. The poison is very strong, and I take the liberty of poking tiny, nearly imperceptible holes in the bags I place the masks in before wrapping and packaging them. Poisonous fumes escape the bag and seep into the house, so chances are good the customer will still be poisoned to some extent. If the customer has ordered a complete hazmat suit, I hedge my bets by contaminating that too. Once the customers have sufficient amounts of the poison in their systems, they begin to succumb to paranoia and death. Some suffer cardiac arrest or respiratory failure. Others are driven to commit murder-suicide due to paranoia. It's easy for me to find obituaries, police blotters, and news articles, so it's simple to find the fates of the majority of my customers. There was a report from a nearby town of a man who went insane and shot his family members to death before taking a fatal dose of pills and booze. There was also an accident in another city of a woman who was shot to death by police after she took a gun and wandered through the streets raving and making violent threats, a case of unintentional suicide by cop. I checked my customers' list against the police blotters and news reports, and sure enough, they were both on the special orders pile list. Sometimes I can tell beforehand that the poison is doing its work. For instance, there was a customer who, a couple weeks after receiving his mask, requested 5 more masks, making all sorts of claims about why he needed them. I could tell from the bizarre claims he made that he was deep into the paranoia stage. I told him not to worry, that I would send him the new shipment of masks expedited delivery at no extra cost, since he was such a good customer, and please let me know when the shipment arrived. 2 days after he contacted me to let me know it had arrived, I read his obituary. They speculated that it was stress that had caused his fatal heart attack. Funny stuff. The more people die, the more fear is generated. The more fearful and paranoid people become, the greater my sales. And after the guy who ordered 5 additional masks had his heart attack, several of his friends and relatives ordered masks from me. This thing had them shaken, they said, and they would feel safer with something which could provide them with a little extra security, because you never know what might happen in life. I told them I understood completely and that I would give them the exact same service I gave him. After the news reports of the woman who was shot by police and of the man who killed his family, I searched and found the advertising offices for the newspaper in those cities. I placed an ad in each one, and after that my sales in those cities took off like a rocket. Many of the customers I gained from those 3 incidents have already died, and more are on their way there. The cycle continues as the process constantly replicates itself. Oh yes, business is good.
A narration read by the Dark Outsider.
Today has been a most excellent day. A most excellent day indeed. It must have been around midnight, and I was stalking the back alleys, scanning the dirty street corners and disheveled parking lots through the rain. It was windy too, that kind of wind that just cuts straight through you no matter how many layers you wear. Windy enough so that the rain tilted at an angle and sneaked its way into the city's crevices, where the street people could be found. There wasn't a dry spot to be seen, even under the withered balconies where they loved to squat. I had barely walked a mile from my flat when I found one huddled up in the doorway of some decrepit old shop across the road, shaking and clutching his legs to his chest. I didn't blame him for that. The cold was particularly strong that night, and even in my padded coat and storm trousers, I was shivering something fierce. What he must have felt like in tatty denim, I dread to think. So I crouched down in front of him, right? And he has this look on his face, this tired, half-asleep look. I can tell his mind's almost frozen over. There's a little apprehension in his eyes, but no hostility. Too cold for that. He looks a few weeks away from death. Maybe a little longer if he can scrounge up something from one of the dumpsters nearby. He's proper skin and bones, and his clothes are sagging off his frame. All he's got to ward away the conditions is a filthy blanket that's littered with stains of all sorts. But he's fresh. I can tell he's only been out here a month at most. The more grizzled ones have scars and bruises, and a lot more hair on their faces. They've seen more, so they know more. And that makes them harder to get. What's up, mate? Sleeping it rough? I spoke as casually as possible, flashing my warmest smile. One thing that's hard to get right is making sure you aren't being patronizing. You never want to make them think you are making fun of them. There's no going back after that. Who are you? He mumbled. Eyes half closed, he was practically asleep, or at least on the cusp of consciousness. I knew I had to be quick or risk losing him entirely. My name's Shelter. Pleasure to meet you. Shelter. It's got a certain ring to it, no? It's what they're all searching for, all the street people. What they all want the most. I've been getting used to it. Sometimes I write it on the back of old envelopes like a signature, or say it to myself in the mirror, practicing my smile. Good morning, Shelter. Hello, Shelter. How are you today, Shelter? You're a handsome devil, aren't you, Shelter? I run the hostel on Brookfield Lane just around the corner, I continue. The man's eyes lit up. Hostel? He whispered coarsely. There's a hostel? Yeah, mate. It's for younger lads like you. Part of the fellowship project. You might have heard of us? Any chance of a place to sleep? Maybe a warm meal? I tilted my head slightly, biting my lip. No, not tonight. It's too full up. Might be space in the morning if you get there early enough. He let out a deep sigh, staring down at the pavement. A few seconds pass as he ponders the idea. He glances up at the clouds a few times, most likely thinking about the long, cold hours ahead. There's a comfy sofa at my place, you know. If you don't mind roughing it, I add. The light returns to his eyes instantly, and his mouth curves up a little into an almost smile. You serious? Deadly serious. I flash another smile, nodding my head gently. And I can make sure you get a place at the hospital too. Come on, you don't want to be out here much longer. The rats will come out soon. Vicious little creatures they are. Proper vermin. And that's done it. He pulls himself off the ground like an old lady, all frail-like, and we walk back down the soaking alleys, not saying a word to each other, him trotting weakly behind me. Soon enough, we'll get to the flat. He's dripping wet, and I stuff some old clothes into his hand. Freshly washed, much better than those paper-thin scraps, I say, gesturing to his torn jacket. He's overjoyed, and I can see that little brain working away in his head, telling him he's on the up and up from here on out. All thanks to some kind stranger. They're all the same, the street people. They all think the same, like a hive mind. I can see it on their faces. He gets changed, and I put some soup on the heat. Its tantalizing scent fills the flat within minutes, and the man takes a large sniff as he snatches it from my hand. He collapses limply onto the sofa and begins to wolf it down, gasping for breaths between slurps. Now comes the fun part. I sneak up behind him just as he finishes the bowl, burping loudly and patting his stomach. He looks like he's just about to drift off, and I grab his neck with both my hands. He barely opens his mouth before I twist it upwards with a satisfying snap. His body lands with a thump on the basement floor. Is it cruel? Selfish? I wouldn't say so. Now he's neither cold nor hungry. It's not like anybody's going to miss him either. It's practically a mercy killing. But my work is never done. I could clean up 1,000 disgusting bums like him, and there would still be thousands more plaguing the streets with their filth. Drunkards, crackheads, criminals, the lot of them. Any regular person would be horrified at these acts, I've come to realize. If they ever found out, they'd call it murder. But it isn't murder. Not in the way they mean it to be. Killing for your country on the fields of some war-torn village isn't murder. Hell, if you do it well enough, they call you a hero. So, if I dispose of a few drugged-up, scruffy tramps weighing the nation down like an anvil, how am I a murderer? No, I'm the opposite. A soldier out of uniform, killing for his country, and I'm going to make a difference. The man's body lies against the woman who came before, a meth-head prostitute in her 20s. They look sweet together, and every now and then, I go back down for another look.
Welcome to the Dark Outsider channel. A quick warning before you listen to this story. It may upset your stomach a bit, so just a warning. Now let's get on to the story. Sammy found inspiration in a book he'd read about a kid his age who made a bet involving eating worms. Little boys are often quite disgusting creatures, but he had no intention of actually following in the protagonist's footsteps. The thought of eating a worm didn't sicken him like it initially did the fictional boy, though. He turned his book report in on Monday and quickly moved on to bigger and better elementary pursuits. A few weeks later, Sally Johnson saw him kneeling over a puddle at a classmate's pool party. A drowned worm laid there in the splash of water that filled a shallow footprint on the cement. It had an almost bluish hue to it, perhaps from the heavy amount of chlorine in the pool. Little boys don't care too much about impressing girls at that age, but when they do make the effort, it often has the opposite effect. Of course, it's hard to say what his intentions were when she wandered over to see what he was looking at. "Ew, that's gross. Don't let it get into the pool," she said, her voice an octave higher than usual. A smile, somewhere between a mischievous smirk and a shy, toothy grin, crept onto the boy's face. He leaned down and nonchalantly slurped up the worm from the cement petri dish. Sammy then followed up the dirty deed with a loud gulp and wiped his mouth across his forearm. Sally ran off screaming to her friends, who were huddled up by the lounge chairs. Word got around quickly, and by the end of lunch period that Monday, he had earned 75 cents and 2 garbage pail kids for drinking a lumpy, curdled concoction. The boys at his lunch table crowded around him with mixed amounts of disbelief, disgust, and pre-adolescent respect printed on their faces. Sammy's popularity skyrocketed that day, but he soon discovered it was hard work keeping his new friends interested. Over the next few days, all the boys and even a few girls in his class watched him eat a couple of juicy worms, a beetle, and a slug. The children's interest peaked and began an inevitable decline when he ate a Salisbury steak that severely broke all the conventions of the 5-second rule. He had drummed up nearly $3 in dare money and a few knickknacks before the novelty of his act had finally faded. His fellow classmates returned to their games of hopscotch, kickball, and foursquare. Sammy scrambled to find something else to draw them back. He knew he needed to up the ante, so he scoured the playground for something delectable and shocking. He was so anxious to get everybody's eyes on him again that he failed to think about the possible consequences of his next move. Part 2. Sammy shot out of his mother's car, kicked open the backyard gate, and clambered up into his treehouse. Tears began to stream down his face as he paced back and forth in the rickety old fort. It had been the domain of his father and uncle many years before he was able to scale the ladder and enter the dark and dusty space. Principal Miller told his mother she was still not entirely sure what had gone down and promised to call as soon as she knew more. The children were very upset, so Sammy was to stay home from school until they better understood the situation. Betty had never seen Miss Miller rattled before. There were rumors she had been a nun for many years before entering into public education. Betty figured anything that could make an old battle axe like her flinch had to be bad. His mother, looking flustered and older than her 37 years, walked into the backyard after her son. "You come down here this instant and explain to me just what the hell happened at school. The principal says you ate a rat?" It seemed too absurd to her to be true. "I didn't hear that right, did I?" she asked pleadingly. Sammy stuck his head out the only window and yelled down, "It wasn't a rat. They're lying. They're all lying." His mother let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, thank God. Well, if it's just a misunderstanding, then it was just a baby bird. It didn't have feathers or nothing. It was going to die soon anyway," he exclaimed between sniffles. The look that sprang to his mother's face startled him for a split second. He had never seen her look at him like that before. It was the same look of utter disgust everyone at school had leveled at him when they heard what he had done. The kids who actually witnessed the act, well, one of them anyway, puked when they heard the hollow bones of the baby robin crunching between his teeth. The shock of Sammy's words unsettled Betty Dawson. She turned away from her son and awkwardly wandered a few paces toward the patio. The voice of reason in her head reminded her that she'd never fully understand little boys, or grown men for that matter. This was just another one of her son's weird phases, and he'd eventually move past it. She took a deep breath and tried to think of a way to handle the situation. Betty made a move to turn back to her son, but threw her arms up in defeat instead. Just stay up there until your father gets... I can't even. The bewildered little boy watched his mother retreat into the house without another word or even a glance in his direction. As soon as she was out of sight, his sniffling and sobs turned into flat-out bawling. His foot lashed out at the old trunk that had been sitting up in the treehouse since before he was born. A shot of pain fired up his leg as he drew back to another kick at the box. He spun around and connected with the south wall instead. A loose plank gave a little and then kicked back, knocking him on his ass. Sammy rolled onto his side in pain, wiped a stream of snot from his face, and then laid there like a quivering lump for the next few hours. His father didn't come home until well after dinner time, despite Betty calling his office several times. "Your son did a horrible thing in school today, and he needs his father to set him straight." The sudden flood of car lights washing over the backyard brought the boy to his feet. He looked towards the driveway and saw his father coming around the car towards the treehouse. Sammy climbed down hesitantly when his father called up to him. "Hey, kiddo, I hear you went without dinner tonight." Sammy picked at the dried snot on his upper lip. "Yeah, Daddy. I got sent home early from school today, but I didn't do nothing wrong. They all lied." Gary picked his son off the ladder and set him on his feet. He squatted down before his son. "Yeah, well, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Go get washed up and we'll come tuck you in shortly." He stood up and tousled Sammy's hair. "Okay, kiddo, off you go." Sammy brightened up a bit and rushed towards the house. Gary couldn't fathom what had everyone so upset, but he would soon find out. A little while later, Sammy laid in bed and listened to his parents angrily muttering back and forth. He was certain they were arguing about him. He didn't get what the big deal was. There were plenty of things people ate that he didn't like, but that didn't bother him. The decision to keep his snacking to himself from now on formed while he was brushing his teeth. Of course, he was going to try new things. He felt like a dauntless explorer cutting his way through a dense jungle in search of an ancient city, and he was excited to see what was up ahead. He was actually disappointed everyone reacted so badly, less because they were disgusted by him and more so because they distracted him from properly saving the delicious little morsel. The taste had been so much better than he'd expected, but it was the squishy yet crunchy texture that left him wanting more. It dawned on him as his eyelids began to feel heavy that it wasn't the attention of his classmates that he craved. He fell asleep to thoughts of what he'd try next, a little dab of saliva soaking into his pillowcase. Part 3. The next couple of weeks taught Sammy a valuable life lesson. People, especially children, can be very cruel. Some predilections are better kept secret, and most importantly, dead things tasted nowhere near as good as living things. Bugs were easy enough to catch, but baby birds didn't just fall out of trees every day. He decided to branch out a bit when he found some old mouse traps in the garden shed. Those first few mice were tasty, but they didn't hit the spot like the baby robin had. Something seemed to be missing. He figured he'd just like birds better than mice, until he discovered a live mouse caught in one of his traps. The excited little boy watched the frightened and pained creature as it twisted and turned, trying to pull its mangled tail free. He wondered, given enough time, if it would eventually chew off its tail to save itself. The thought intrigued him, but he was too hungry to risk losing the squirming, squeaking morsel. He worried about the damage it might do to the inside of his mouth, so he took precautions to avoid that. The poor rodent squealed in pain as he snapped each of its limbs. The 4 melodious snaps blended with its screeching to create a harmony that was better than any song Sammy had ever heard. He decided to go another route, but was glad to have discovered the wondrous melody. Instead of trying to chew it whole, he bit its head off with one quick, deliberate bite. He instantly praised himself for the spontaneous action as warm blood gushed over his tongue and trickled down his throat. The boy made a trip to the library the very next day and signed out some books on trapping live animals, being careful not to alert anyone to his activities, especially his parents. He scrounged around the garage and garden shed for tools and materials. It wasn't long before he realized he had a knack, an almost instinctual ingenuity for building things. Part 4. Time passed and Sam settled into his new reality. He kept to himself at school, played the part of the odd but good son, and delved further into his hobby in his free time. He eventually ventured beyond just eating bugs and rodents. Flyers of missing pets littered the small town. They weren't hard to miss, taped to storefront windows and stapled to telephone poles. He worried someone would eventually link them to the kid who once ate a bird. But he gave people too much credit. Sam learned that memories and attention spans tended to be quite short. Besides that, most people aren't willing to believe that depravity could live just around the corner. They're unwilling to pay attention to the sharp reality staring them in the face for fear of bursting their bubbles, leaving them naked and vulnerable in a cruel and unforgiving world. Sam hid in that blind spot, the harmless, nerdy oddball that kept his head buried in his school books, had everybody fooled. No one even batted an eye when he bought an old van. Their pedestrian minds considered the possibility of maybe a little pot smoke rolling out the windows, but never panicked screams for help. He'd been working on it most of the summer and hoped to have it purring like a kitten by the fall. He was so looking forward to college, a whole new place where no one knew him. He could reinvent himself, shed the label of the weird kid that ate bugs, and meet new people.